So many folks are currently now hating on the new DMC Netflix anime for a host of different reasons. The millennial writing, Dante seemingly sidelined in his own show, or that they're using a different character in-universe's voice actor for Dante, and then there's Lady. Whether their issue with these subjects are valid or not, I find there is something about Netflix's Devil May Cry, and many other projects for that matter, there is something missing from them. A lesser crime, perhaps, but something that sets the mood for any medium you are ingesting. Aesthetic, atmosphere, vibe. Something so massively integral to any franchise that stripping a project of that familiar aesthetic makes that thing simply something new with that franchise name slapped onto it. Imagine, if you can for a moment, the very unique aesthetic a game like Final Fantasy has. Its aesthetic is a staple throughout every title, regardless if each new entry is a new world with new characters, a new look. Every game is something new entirely, and often a far cry from the entry that preceded it. And yet, its familiar aesthetic, or look, if you will, remains. Whether or not that look translated well into its remake is an entirely different topic. Imagine watching an anime like Dragon Ball, and the signature Toriyama style was gone. It's sort of what happened with GT, and it's why it's so divisive, because Toriyama wasn't involved in the creation of GT, so it was up to someone new to continue that familiar Toriyama aesthetic, and in essence keep that magic going with something new, and they almost managed to do it. Almost. It was Dragon Ball, but there was something just a little off with it. Such is the case with Netflix Devil May Cry. To an extent. They brought back your flagship characters. They brought back Dante, Lady, who now goes by Mary, and whether or not this interpretation of Lady/Mary is too dissimilar from how she's portrayed in-game is, again, not the topic of this video. Essentially, Netflix's Devil May Cry gives you, the viewer, enough to be convinced that this is in fact the game that you so dearly love. There's Dante, sporting his red coat, with that oh-so-familiar sword and pistols. Also, his wisecracking persona is back. Sort of. The basic premise is there. Here you have Dante, half demon, killing bad demons, and such is the basic concept of the games as well as the anime, and it just seems like that was enough for them. When creating this, that was enough. Devil May Cry's aesthetic, its whole atmosphere, was something quite a few games of that era tended to have, whether intentional or not. Its whole mood is quite difficult to quantify in a few words, but if I have to use a few: brooding, edgy, cold, or stylishly bleak, if you will. Similarly, its whole aesthetic is quite tough to sum up in a few words, but for the sake of this video, let's call it neo-gothic, baroque-like, monochrome with hints of red, and one can call it maybe desolate elegance. Desolate elegance sounds fucking good, eh? And now with this new anime adaptation, it's like they washed their hands entirely of that aesthetic. I understand from a budget point of view, it looks far better on paper to do the best one can without going overboard and sticking to what works within the lines of what studios have done before. This is the aesthetic or style the studio does. The animators are well versed in this medium and style, and it would be far more cost effective to make the best product while sticking to what they know well. I get that. It's very seldom the fault of the animators. They are given the work to do by the studio that acquired this project. Unfortunately, creativity, especially in the big leagues, it's often second to finances invested, time invested, etc. But there has to be a conversation about honoring the source material you're piggybacking off of. The new Trigun, for example, tried its best, I think, to capture that arid, desolate feel of the original. It felt a tad too clean and polished. That grit was gone, but they tried. The same can't be said for so many others. This DMC anime, whatever you may think about it, at least tried its best to get that feel across within the medium they had. Let's rewind to 2007. The original Devil May Cry anime aired to, well, not great reception, but what it got right was atmosphere. The look was desaturated, oozing that cathedral gloom, if you will. Dante didn't just talk cool, he existed in a world that had the same brooding charm as the games. The bar, the devil hunts, even the sound design, everything felt grimy, like gunmetal and cigarette ash. It was stylized restraint, something that echoed the world of the games. One can't expect to capture the look and feel of an entirely different medium perfectly, but it's simply the understanding by the studio that they should damn well try. What is a Devil May Cry anime without a signature look and feel? It simply isn't. Now fast forward to Netflix. On the surface, it does have great fight choreography, and by extension, the animation does benefit greatly from modern animation. Slick frames and, well, quippy lines that don't land. Regardless, if you peel back the action and great modern visuals, something's missing. That dim, operatic menace, that gothic grime, the soul of the setting has been polished off, repackaged for wider appeal, and to that sentiment, I do understand. In the current climate, you want to make sure your project gets its returns, but at the cost of the entire tone and the feel of the world you're basing your project in, something is amiss here, folks. This isn't even about nostalgia, it's about aesthetic continuity. That quiet understanding of what makes Devil May Cry feel like Devil May Cry. And somehow the 2007 anime, flaws and all, understood that better than what we just got. The landscape has changed, and it feels like either our bar is so low that we can't see a blatant cash grab fan fiction for what it is, or that we are blind to what is staying faithful to franchises that we have deep attachments to. I've heard this sentiment, and it honestly baffles me. It's a great anime, if you're not a fan of the games. That's a moot point. Why make anything at all, if not to give something the fans want? The very reason a project like this would even exist, I would imagine. Now here's the thing. A lot of folks say this new Devil May Cry anime is good as long as you don't expect it to be Devil May Cry. And that's the kicker, isn't it? Because at that point, what are we even watching? A solid action show with demons and a red coat? Sure, but when you strip away the aesthetic, the vibe, the tone, the mood, you're left with a recognizable title haphazardly strewn across something vaguely resembling that thing you once liked. And that's fine if it wasn't wearing the face of something it clearly doesn't remember how to be. Netflix's Devil May Cry is by no means the only culprit of acquiring a beloved IP, then creating something new with no intention of continuing that signature look of the world that very project you're adapting takes place in. And what's strange is, the wider audience seems to be buying into it. Perhaps by giving viewers nonsense for so long, when something like this comes along and in some capacity is a decent looking anime, you take it, because deep down, you can't expect any better. I don't know, but it is worrisome. Imagine taking a beloved video game franchise, stripping away something integral to that franchise. It becomes something fans don't recognize as the same franchise. Oh wait, that has been done. We really do have a low bar. The original Devil May Cry titles didn't just have an aesthetic, they were an aesthetic. Every visual choice, every music cue, every shadowed cathedral or echoing hallway was crafted to reinforce a very deliberate mood. Gothic, stylish, or haunted by a cool sense of dread. You know, it wasn't set dressing, it was a narrative language. The vibe wasn't an afterthought, it was part of the storytelling, deeply embedded in the tone, pacing, and even the gameplay. Stripping that away in a modern adaptation, no matter how well animated or visually good looking it is, doesn't just change how it looks, it alters what it means. To ignore the aesthetic is to miss the point entirely. It's not nostalgia talking, it's about respecting a visual and tonal identity that was always core to the experience. What often gets overlooked in discussions about adaptations is how intentional that original aesthetic was. It wasn't just there to look cool, it was a product of a unique creative vision. The creators used the limitations of early 3D graphics as a stylistic advantage, leaning into shadows, stark lighting, and texture-heavy environments that evoked atmosphere more than detail. It was driven by tone. In that constraint, there was innovation, and in that innovation, a clear identity. Today, with modern production values and smoother animation, that sense of purpose can get lost. Replacing grit with gloss may seem like an upgrade, but in doing so, you risk sanding off the edges that gave the original its soul. A true creative adaptation shouldn't just ask, what can we adapt next? Rather, what they should be asking is, what was this trying to be, and how do we honor that in a modern sense? It's a lot more word heavy and a lot less punchy, but you know, I'm well aware that much of the aesthetic of those older games was made out of necessity because of hardware limitations, and yet with those limitations created a unique atmosphere. Now, given how far technology has come, we can quote-unquote improve upon older IPs when modernizing them. And to that I say, do we? Imagine using modern software to create the visually stunning, well-animated visuals of modern animation, but purposefully attempting to recreate that edgy yet limited look of the older IP you're adapting. As opposed to trying to improve the look, lean into it. Imagine how visually striking it would be to lean into that gritty, desaturated, shadowy, almost monochrome with flashes of color vibe. It would be a modern adaptation that stands out among all the other lookalikes. In an attempt to modernize, we've washed out all the personality of so many franchises. In closing, keep the aesthetic, keep the vibe, keep the damn mood. The atmosphere should not be an optional attachment to a franchise. It is the franchise. Without it, it is something else entirely. No hate to any and all who likely work their asses off on Netflix's Devil May Cry. The creatives are often not to blame. Creatives are simply tools to see someone else's vision through, often someone who isn't very creative themselves.